thank you very much for joining us for this interview today. And before we get started, it'd be good for us to find out a little bit about who you are.
Sure thing. I'm Paula McEwan. I was President of the EIS. I've now handed that on to Alan Crosby. As well as that, I am Local Association Secretary for Inverclyde, so I look after our members in Inverclyde, and I have various other roles in terms of committees and national work that I do, as well as my local work.
So EIS does a lot of things, as I'm sure you know, and one of those aspects that the EIS is involved in is campaigning, not just for members on the ground, but campaigning more broadly around equality issues, poverty. And one of those campaigns that the EIS has been involved in has been around free school meals, and this has been a campaign that has actually been supported more broadly across the trade union movement as well. In fact, I was reading the other day that free school meals was on the STC agenda 125 years ago.
Oh my goodness.
So for people that maybe aren't as involved in the campaigning aspect of the EIS, can you tell me why the campaign to expand universal free school meals is of importance and interest to the EIS, and what, from your perspective, is some of the key beneficiaries of that?
So I suppose from a social justice point of view, the fact that 125 years later we are still talking about this is shameful in a lot of ways. It just shows that in terms of poverty we haven't progressed in that time. Free school meals for me it's about additional support. It's if we have children in our classrooms that are hungry, that's an additional support need. That means they are not in a place where they're ready to learn, and that's what we should all be about. This is about the education of our young people. And if they've got a sore tummy or a sore head, or they're worried about where their next meal is coming from, they are not in a place where they're ready to learn. So this is about additional support needs as much as all of the other recognised needs are. This campaign is important because, as we know, our other campaign, Stand Up for Quality Education, is around sound learning. It's about funding in the system to provide our young people with everything they need. And if part of that is feeding, I can't believe I'm having to say, we have children who need fed. Why aren't we feeding them? It's a fundamental right. And it does set them up for their learning. We know that. All of the research tells us that children who aren't hungry will learn better. So it's all about that.
You used the word shameful, and that you can't believe that we're in 2024 talking about this. The Scottish Government in some ways has made some progress on free school meals, but there was a commitment that by 2022 all primary pupils would have a universal free school meal, and it's now June 2024. Not only are we still discussing poverty and we're still discussing free school meals, but that commitment has yet to be implemented. How does that make you feel?
It's disappointing. That the commitment was made was fantastic, and absolutely we would support that. I know it's come in gradually up to primary 5. We started with P1 to 3, and then it's increased to primary 4 and 5, but it's nowhere near enough. It doesn't meet the manifesto commitment, but it's also not enough. Our children don't stop being hungry when they're primary 6 and 7. They don't stop being hungry when their families don't suddenly be able to afford to feed their children because they've turned 10. That's just not how it works. So it is disappointing that commitment hasn't been met. We do see progress with it. It's not quick enough. It has to come more quickly.
And something that I think the EIS have said quite often is that, and you touched on there, is that hunger knows no age boundaries. And I guess, whilst there's been some discussion on expansion and The EIS has welcomed commitments, although it's not been implemented, and I guess if you've touched on there, it's not been as urgent for the EIS or anybody involved in this campaign. There has been some progress in some councils. Yours being one of quite interest that's quite unique. So while we wait for other councils to think about, are they going ahead, are they implementing universal free school meals, are they not? While we wait for all of that, your council has done something quite unique. What is that?
So Inverclyde Council do implement free school meals from primary 1 up to primary 7. I am incredibly proud of that. It doesn't go far enough, and we will still be pushing that goes into secondary for all the reasons I've outlined already. But even before we implemented from primary 1 to 7, when primary 1 to 3 was being implemented, Inverclyde went a step ahead and introduced it into primary 4 at that point. So we were always ahead of the curve. There has been cross-party support for that in the council, so this didn't come about just because there was a whole lot of campaigning went on with it, but there is cross-party support. There were some dissenting voices who now recognise that actually it was the right thing to do. So from August 2023, all of our young people in primary 1 to primary 7 have access to a free school meal. That came with a cost attached, because they then had to, facilities management went in and looked at the catering spaces that we have. They have implemented changes in our catering spaces. They did that over summer 2023, knowing that implementation date was August 23. So our kids are now coming into their second year of universal free school meals. But, because there's always a but, it means now that our families who for this year have had free school meals implemented for primary 7, as those young people move into S1, families are now having to find the budget. They're now having to re-budget. So on top of the new uniform and everything else that goes along with that transition, they're having now to find money for school meals in secondary. So absolutely, that's why we will keep campaigning that the universal provision should be for all school-aged children.
Brilliant. It's it's interesting because we've had some discussions throughout the campaign and with some people in Scottish Government around what is the hold up, and why is it that if some councils are ready to go, why are they not being encouraged to go? So I think it is really inspiring and hopeful that Inverclyde have went ahead and did this, and there's councils that we know could implement it, but there seems to be a little bit of a delay or a bit of uncertainty as should we implement, should we not, should all councils go together, should all councils wait? Do you have any reflections on that about some councils that are ready to go, like Inverclyde?
So many reflections. So I suppose my question to the councillors in those areas would be, if you have the capacity and you have the funding and you have the facilities to feed children who aren't being fed at home can't be fed at home because of the poverty that they're living in, why wouldn't you? If you are able to feed those children, how do you square in your head not feeding hungry children when you can feed hungry children? Inverclyde have done it. So if Inverclyde can do it, there's no reason why those authorities that are ready to go shouldn't be going.
Yeah. Some of the commitments right now in Scotland have been very much focused in primary school. But there seems to just not be the same momentum from Scottish Government or councillors or policymakers around why this is important for secondary school. How important do you think this is in a secondary school context?
I touched on it earlier, it has to be. Our children and young people, when they move into secondary, family circumstances for that whole cohort don't change overnight because they go into secondary school. So they're coming through, and arguably we know the way teenagers, if you're in a home that's got a full fridge, it won't be full for long if you've got a teenager in the house. So we know just not geographically, biologically, they need huge amounts of fuel, and if school can provide those huge amounts of fuel for them, again, why wouldn't we? Free school meals are means tested, which means, and my belief is that the families that are getting themselves into debt are those at that just managing level. So they don't qualify for free school meals, but because they're just managing, they're not managing that debt. Why? And again, it's back to government, back to councils. Why would you deliberately have families that are just managing going into debt? Why would you allow that to happen if you're ready to go and you're ready to feed the kids and prevent that debt from happening to families as well? I don't understand that.
Yeah, I think some of the resistance around expanding to all, and particularly primary, is just kind of what you've outlined there around that it should be more targeted support, or an assumption that because a family isn't accessing free school meals that they're not in poverty. We know that, you know, with the cost of living crisis, people are in and out of that poverty line, but also, as you've said, that you know, there's lots of families in debt, there's lots of families in poverty, they don't qualify for free school meals at the moment, and circumstances are really challenging. And there appears to be this assumption that for secondary school that they don't need a school meal or that they don't want it, and we've been speaking to some young people who have told us otherwise, that actually, you know, they would like to be involved in the school meal design. Can we bring in food trucks? Can we make it a bit more trendy? Because otherwise, are we encouraging young people who do need a school meal not to take it, or they might go out with the school community? So there's these kind of arguments that are coming through in this assumption that secondary school pupils just don't want it. They don't like their school meals. They want to go out. They want to go to Greggs. They want to go to McDonald's, and you know, they don't like the school meals. So, you know, what's the point? That's the kind of arguments we've been.
It's a cultural shift, isn't it? And I suppose if it starts in primary and our children are used to going to the canteen and are used to having that access to a free school meal, as they move through into secondary, why is that not then part of that transition process? That here's how we do lunches. There probably is a case for looking at menus. I know the Youth Parliament produced a report, and that was one of the things that came through really strongly in that, is that young people would like to stay in school for lunch, and a free school meal would increase the number of kids that are staying in school over lunch, but they want to say in that, they want their voice heard in that. But it's an absolute cultural shift. I was on a trip to Sweden. The Swedish Teachers Union had invited us along and took us to a vocational college. So in Sweden they have universal free school meals if you are in education at all. So we were in a vocational college over lunchtime, and the teenagers were queuing out the door to get into the canteen. So it's a cultural shift. It will take time. It'll also take the commitment to give it that time, not to say after 18 months, well, this isn't working, because it's an absolute start, primary one now, and as you're talking to them about going to high school and going through into secondary, going through into college, if that's as far as we go, if we follow the Swedish model, that's what you do, that you stay in school for lunch. Then there is a cultural shift for young people, for families, for schools a lot of the time. But if we get it right, why wouldn't young people stay in school for lunch?
Yeah, that's a really, really excellent point. I think you're making good comparisons to Sweden as well. And when you look at some of the countries across the world, and you look at their attainment, and you look at some of the great things to do in education, one of those things, if you've already outlined, is that they have universal free school meals.
And that's what it's all about, isn't it? Although it's about that tackling poverty agenda and the social justice agenda, ultimately for us in schools, it's about having those young people ready to learn. And that's not just about having food in their tummies, that's about not having the worry of where their next meal is coming from. I'm forever saying in the house, somebody go, I'm starving. You're not, you know where your next meal is coming from. So you are not starving. But for a lot of our young people, part of the dysregulated behaviours that we are seeing, part of the attainment, is that they don't have enough food and they don't know where that food's coming from, or they're worried because they know mum and dad didn't eat the night before so that they could. So there's a whole raft of things going on there. And if universal free school meals takes that away, they're ready to learn, which then the investment in free school meals now and getting our young people ready to learn is part of that wider picture of investment in education that further down the line lifts the pressure on the health service, the justice service, the adult social care service, because you've got young people who are better able to engage with their education, so they are better able to engage with that emotional literacy stuff to be able to regulate themselves, so that in later life they're able to regulate themselves. That lifts the pressure on the justice system. They are able to make healthier choices around food. They are better educated around food. That lifts pressure on the health service. The investment now is a saving in the longer term. We need politicians to see any investment in education, including in free school meals, as an investment in our society for decades and generations to come.
You've eloquently outlined, the wider beneficiaries of universal free school meals, because I think that something that this campaign recognises as well, that the poverty aspect, the hunger aspect is obviously really important, but as you've just mentioned, there are wider social and economic beneficiaries of universal free school meals. And the Scottish Government have said that they want to become a good food nation, they want to increase nutrition, and that seems interlinked, that if you've got universal free school meals, perhaps it's not going to be the silver bullet solution to all of our problems in society, but it might be part of the puzzle. And that leads me on to the new First Minister, John Swinney, has said that he doesn't just want to mitigate poverty, he wants to absolutely eradicate child poverty, and that this will be his biggest single mission as the new First Minister. How important do you think this campaign is in the context of that mission of eradicating child poverty?
So in terms of eradicating child poverty, absolutely free school meals sits with that, and I know there are people who argue about it being means tested, but if it isn't means tested, it means we don't miss anyone. If it's means tested and we miss one child that's living in poverty and whose parents either aren't claiming child benefit and are choosing not to, so aren't means tested for it, or are in that just managing cohort, then it's worth it to have it universally, because we don't want to miss anyone. In terms of child poverty, I'm going to look at that as part of one of our other wider campaigns. That's around that societal change again, and that's around getting adults out of poverty. That's that longer term. Our children now are the adults of the future, so you're back to that long term. Invest now and reap the benefits, not in the 2 years that John Swinney's got now as First Minister before the next elections, but it's generational. But I'm going to tie it into a further education fight, because if we're going to lift our adults out of poverty, education's the way to do that as well. And that's education not just in the reskill, upskill, get into or on in your work. It's around that education of nutritional food, it's around that, but then you've got to have nutritional food that's affordable. So there's a whole wider economic business. It's speaking to Tesco's and Asda, and it's bringing all of those stakeholders in to that fight to eradicate child poverty, but also how do we do that? It isn't enough to say it. It isn't, universal free school meals isn't enough. It's one of the tools that will get us there, but there are much wider societal changes that need to happen.
To anyone not yet on board,
How could they not be?
You've answered the questions. You've answered your own question. Do you have any final reflections on the campaign, the importance of this campaign, or just free school meals?
I think for folk who aren't involved in education, it's maybe a difficult concept to understand when you have children in front of you that you know aren't eating. The impact of that, not just on that wee person and not just on that family, but on the wider system around them. So we know that we have teachers feeding our kids. We know that breakfast clubs are going some way to mitigate, but we know that children coming in late, the first question we say is, have you had breakfast? and we will send them to the canteen and we will get them a bit of toast and we'll get them some cereal. It's always, you know, my tummy's sore, did you have breakfast this morning? What have you got? Have you had a snack at playtime? Sometimes they maybe have at breakfast, but family can't afford a snack. So we know that teachers are providing for kids that don't have, and they're doing that out of their own pocket. Now, we will continue, it's not our job, but we will continue to do that because we get this wee person that you can see looking at them that they're hungry. But that's difficult for folk that aren't seeing that every day. But that's their reality every day in our schools. There are children and young people whose parents don't eat so that they can eat. And universal free school meals is a way to allow those children to eat. And if the adults know that they have a meal coming, then the adults might eat. And if that isn't a compelling argument, all hope is lost to you.
Absolutely. Paula, thank you very much. That was really, I really appreciate your time, and hopefully those that have yet to be convinced are now, and that we win this campaign.
We have to.
Soon. Yeah.
We have to.
I think every one of us will keep going until it's implemented, so thank you very much.
Thanks, Eradicating.